Don't Look Up is one of the most polarizing films of the decade, but not for the reasons you might expect. Despite being nominated for Academy Awards, it's been largely panned, and not just from conservative critics, it's received ire from liberals as well. Considering its controversies, themes, and the absolutely stacked cast, Don't Look Up is a bizarre anomaly of a movie. So today I wanted to discuss one of the many thematic questions surrounding the movie, and that is the central question: are liberals worth a damn? There's a lot to be said about Don't Look Up from a review perspective, but my weirdo brain finds it more interesting to discuss the movie in a metatextual sense. So for this video, I really want to focus on the movie's themes, and to do so, for those of you who maybe haven't seen the movie, let me give you the quickest of recaps. Don't Look Up is an apocalyptic black comedy about a group of scientists trying to convince the president to do something about a comet hurtling toward Earth, as they find themselves battling against the entrenched political and economic powers that surround them. Despite their efforts, the tech mogul ditches the plan to destroy the comet and instead lets the comet near Earth in order to harvest its resources. His plan goes awry, and as you might imagine, Earth gets wiped out. Now obviously that's skipping past a lot of details, but that's the movie boiled down to its barest essentials. Now you may have noticed, as my summary gives away, the movie doesn't end with them succeeding. Which leads us to one of the failures of the movie that I would like to focus on today: the fact that it doesn't show us a way out. As you can gather from any clip of Leo or Jennifer Lawrence yelling at the TV cameras, it's a pretty pessimistic film. But that's not for lack of the characters caring. In fact, they try a lot of different things to stop the catastrophe. They play ball within the media system by going on TV and trying to get the word out. Leo becomes a close ally to the president, and despite compromising his ideal values, he tries to at least be a reasonable voice in the room. Then they start a grassroots campaign to pressure the president into destroying the comet. They essentially run through the liberal playbook of the right way to make change happen, but ultimately, they're unsuccessful. No tactic they employ, no line of argument they use on TV, and no pop star they convince to spread their message changes their outcome. Now, a lot of people view this ending as depressing, and I certainly understand why you'd come to that conclusion, but I want to clarify, I don't think it's black pill fodder. As a nihilist, I actually find the ending kind of relaxing. You have all these characters sitting around, enjoying each other's company, talking about what kind of apple pie they prefer, and, simple shit like that. All the while, a comet is about to wipe out life on Earth. It's a very Sisyphus-type beat to stare directly at the face of chaos and to defiantly find happiness in such an otherwise bleak moment. And I happen to think this is an important attitude to leave an audience with. I personally find it can be agonizing to be just constantly consumed with thoughts of how shitty everything is, and learning to find happiness amidst the chaos is important. So I just wanted to clarify, because I really do like the ending, that I don't think it's depression porn or anything like that, but it does have one specific limitation. What is its call to action? The film is pretty blatantly an allegory for climate change, and a lot of the creative team are activists for climate change. Wait, sorry, I meant activists against climate change. If they were activists for climate change, they'd be employed at PragerU. But with McKay's pretty clear desire to spur conversations about combating climate change, we, as an audience, have to ask, what are we meant to do with the information and emotions the film gives us? If we read up on climate science studies and see the doom that's quickly approaching us, what does this movie suggest we do about that? Now, I'm not asking the movie to give us a specific answer or a step-by-step directive, but despite being a movie about the need for radical change, it feels trapped in a painfully liberal mindset. Everything the characters try is woefully conventional. The most they can think to do is hold a concert with pop stars. And although Kid Cudi's hums are indeed life-changing, they're woefully inadequate to, do anything. Even in the face of literal, guaranteed societal collapse, all the characters can think to do is some annoyingly lib shit. And at the end of the day, it wasn't enough. And I'd argue it was never going to be. What in the hell is Ariana Grande supposed to do? Yes, there is absolute, wonderful power in peaceful protesting. And after enough of it, sometimes change happens. But I really want to stress that takes decades of activism, sometimes thousands of deaths, and I would be remiss if we skipped over the word eventually there. It took a full century after the abolition of slavery to get out of the Jim Crow era and even begin to approach what we could call equal rights. And it was a tough battle for that entire 100-year period. And though it eventually did work, that wasn't easy or quick. But with the in-universe threat of the comet, as well as our own universe's threat of climate change, there isn't exactly a whole lot of time to sit around, cross our fingers, raise our picket signs, and wait for the slow, arduous progress of liberalism to limp to a slightly better society. I mean, Jesus, even on the day I started writing this, I was getting bombarded with articles about how the Arctic and the Antarctic, the poles, which are supposed to be polar opposites of each other, are both warm at the same time, which is scary. So we as a species need change now. We can't just sit around and wait for 20 years from now when it's finally not a political liability for a president to advocate for electric cars. Now, Don't Look Up does acknowledge the need for hasty and large-scale action, but when the characters come into conflict with the powers that be, the movie either can't understand an alternative or fails to provide an alternative solution. How do you take influence away from the powerful acting in their own self-interest? It's a complicated question, and it is a question the movie poses, but not one that it answers, which leaves its viewers in a weird place. You're presented with an existential threat and shown the ways our institutions may worsen the threat, but you aren't given any tangible way to go out into the real world and affect change, and that can be debilitating. I'm helping stage manage a play right now, which may sound like a weird diversion, but stay with me. There's one specific line that feels really important to this movie. It's like you've saved them from a drowning boat, but you've left them with no way to get back to shore. That line, out of context, is weirdly applicable to Don't Look Up. It's not that the movie has to give me a detailed step-by-step set of instructions. It's just that the movie either doesn't understand or doesn't offer up any alternative solutions, and in the absence of alternatives, it feels like all it's leaving us with is a shrug of the shoulders. Now, you might counter and say how the movie is about the fact that passive, normie liberalism won't get the job done, and I would agree with that assessment, but regardless, the essential part of a call to action is the action, or at least providing some suggested actions. As it stands, Don't Look Up fails to provide any alternative actions it thinks will work, and thus leaves us with a sense of anxiety without a direction to do anything with it. In contrast, look at a movie like Sorry to Bother You, which despite taking place in a bleak world, ending in a bleak manner, at least has its characters fighting the good fight at the end and gives us, the audience, a sense of what could be done to make change happen. Whereas Don't Look Up leaves us with a lack of understanding what we're supposed to do next. So, when I say something in the title along the lines of, this movie's a failure of liberalism, I means it fails to offer a way forward, and thus falls into the same faulty, neoliberal approach to change that I feel like it's trying to criticize. Now, while I have my issues with some of the lib shit in the movie, paradoxically enough, one part of the movie feels like a really strong critique of liberals, and that can be found in the character of President Orleans. Meryl Streep plays a career politician president whose ambitions get in the way of any meaningful change, as she's more obsessed about winning the midterms than addressing the crisis at hand. Now, there's a lot written about her character, but one topic I find rarely addressed is the question, is she a liberal or a conservative. A lot of people are convinced she's hardline conservative, but the film makes her politics vague. We don't hear anything about her platform or about which party she belongs to, so who she represents is essentially bipartisan. Despite this, most people seem to assume she's a stand-in for Trump, but there's specific evidence to suggest that she could be a liberal. There's not only a photo in her office of Bill Clinton, but one with Mariah Carey, which not only suggests a connection to like Norby entertainment liberal elites, but Mariah Carey's a pretty vocal Hillary stan. A lot of people look at her rallies and say the iconography and rhetoric is modeled after Trump, therefore she must be a conservative. But at the same time, one of her most vocal in-universe critics is called like Patriot News Network or something, which is a clear stand-in for conservative media. To me, none of this info is a misstep or an unintentional contradiction. It's a clear and pointed statement. That, when faced with a radical, left-adjacent movement, particularly one that challenges business, liberals and conservatives are functionally similar. And while I think we can all imagine how conservatives would react in-universe here, I think McKay is trying to say that we're a liberal faced with this legitimate, radical, left-adjacent movement. They would parrot conservative tactics and talking points in order to dispel said threat. And this is just historical fact. As I discussed in my Seattle General Strike video, liberal outlets like the New York Times cheered on the deportation of socialists during and right after World War I. Like, liberals were almost as involved in the Red Scares as conservatives. And fast forwarding almost a century to my boy Booney Sandals, it's shocking how many liberals seem to mirror conservative talking points when talking bad about his candidacy. And this is a trend Don't Look Up is hell-bent on addressing. To Adam McKay, whether Orleans is a liberal or a conservative is irrelevant, because when push comes to shove, when it's time to stand up to the business people to fix the world, both sides of the aisle cave, and often use the same rhetorical tools. They'll babble about how their opponents are just trying to fear-monger. They'll use vague appeals to populism and blue-collarness despite supporting corporations, and they'll do everything in their power to crush the radical threat, even if they happen to have a pride flag in their Twitter bio. McKay presents a pretty damning and pretty accurate critique of liberalism, but some people seem to find this hard to come to terms with, and that makes sense. Our two-party system creates a sense of binary, a sense of us versus them, so it can be hard to imagine liberals having more in common with conservatives. But you know, funny enough, what's one of the examples of the central claim? Some of the backlash to Don't Look Up. Over the past few months, I've read quite a few reviews of Don't Look Up, and one thing has really stuck with me. Some liberal outlets sounded oddly similar to conservative ones when they criticized Don't Look Up. In his review, conservative pundit Michael Knowles said Don't Look Up is so caught up in its own hysterical shrieking that it drowns out any laughs. Which is a pretty standard conservative rhetorical tactic. There's a concerted effort to make climate change activists out to be fear-mongering weirdos. It just so happens a lot of their media networks are funded by fossil fuel companies, but don't look into that. I'm sure that's unrelated. Anyway, you'd expect a liberal media outlet like, I don't know, the Rolling Stone to have a different takeaway from Michael Knowles. Except the quote I just read is from the Rolling Stone review. Michael Knowles said similar things about McKay being hysterical, but the Rolling Stone review is full of lines like that sound ripped from some, I don't know, oil baron-funded conservative media outlet. Rather than this being some sort of fluke, I think this is a perfect example of one of the movie's central critiques. The movie itself presents a sort of threat to liberalism's love of painfully slow, incremental change. Though the movie is, again, at times pretty liberal, it does present a crisis to which radical change is really the only option. The movie does a bad job of showing what that radical change might look like, but it's more or less our only option for climate change at this point. So, much like how I find it interesting how liberals respond to Bernie Sanders, it's very telling that several liberal media outlets respond to Don't Look Up in ways similar to conservatives. And, oddly enough, it validates one of the film's central critiques. liberals can be feckless, and in the face of existential threats, they've time and time again proven unreliable, as they'll flip the script and are known to act pretty similar to conservatives when challenged. Now, I want to wrap up by clarifying, I don't mean this critique to apply to your average liberal voter. I think McKay is more specifically talking about liberal institutions and politicians. And at the very least, I know that's what I mean when I criticize liberals in this way. So a clear takeaway McKay presents is that whatever bold action to combat climate change we need to take, it can only be achieved by winning over regular people, who are, in fact, able to be convinced if, and big if here, we can break through the institutions that want to keep them uninformed. Even the biggest Orléans stands hate her when they can physically see the comet. It's not a matter of intelligence or goodwill that these people don't believe in reality, as some critics weirdly accuse McKay of implying. Rather, it's just that they're tapped into incredibly convincing networks of disinformation. So, although the uphill battle to combat climate change will be difficult, I think what McKay is trying to tell us is that the way forward is to rely on the power of mass movements. Don't Look Up is a fascinating movie. I can't think of another piece of media that both criticizes an ideology and falls into its traps quite like this movie. Despite being messy in a lot of places and in a lot of ways I didn't get to in this video, I do think it's a movie worthy of discussion and worthy of dissection, as it's the biggest movie I can think of to, narratively at least, try to address conversations about climate change. For all of its successes, as well as all of its failures, I think Don't Look Up is a movie worth a watch and worth your time to ponder. That'll be it for this video, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Now, let's turn it on over to the pre-recorded outro. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to toss me a like and subscribe down below. But if you really want to help me out, you can join me over on Patreon. Patrons get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content, like early versions of every video, and exclusive Patreon-only videos. Plus, if you join the Piley Benton's Biggest Boys tier, you get your name read off at the end of every video. Zoth, Revo Pregame, Emily, Kyle Foley, Jennifer Jones, Caffeine Unicorn, Goblin of the Year, and Cameron Fordo. So if you want to hear your lovely name read off at the end of every video, be sure to join me on this specific tier. Thanks much, everyone, and I'll see you next time.